He said, "Your relatives have tried to save you. They're still trying to save you. And we can't have that, so we have to kill you."
Yakov Yurovsky was the man who stared into the Tsar's eyes as he gave the order. He was known as a cold, methodical Bolshevik loyal to the cause. Or was he? The recent discovery of his lost personal diary tells a very different story. It's the record of a man tormented by his own actions, and the proof is a secret coded telegram he hid within its pages. The message confirms the order came from the highest level of power and reveals a secret about the Romanovs' end that was meant to stay buried forever. The Lost Pages of Yakov Yurovsky. For over 100 years, the story of the Romanovs' final night has been shrouded in mystery and propaganda. The official narrative, carefully crafted by the Soviets, was simple. In the chaotic summer of 1918, with the anti-Bolshevik White Army closing in on the city of Yekaterinburg, the local Ural Soviet made a difficult independent decision. They ended the lives of Tsar Nicholas II and his family to prevent their rescue. It was painted as a frantic, necessary act of revolution. The truth has been hiding in plain sight, buried in a place no one thought to look. What many overlooked was a small, unassuming archive right in Yekaterinburg. Just recently, while cataloging items from the old regional secret police, a junior archivist stumbled upon a sealed wooden crate. It wasn't marked with anything important. Inside, beneath stacks of yellowed newspapers and rusted medals, was a simple leather-bound notebook. It was a personal diary. The name on the inside cover? Yakov Yurovsky. This is a name that history remembers in a whisper. Yurovsky was the commandant of the Apatiev house, the man who personally planned and oversaw the Romanov family's dispatch. He was, for all intents and purposes, the executioner-in-chief. Finding his diary was already a monumental discovery. But what the archivist found tucked between two pages, dated July 16, 1918, the day before the event, was the bombshell. It was a flimsy, yellowed telegram form. The ink was faded, but the coded message was unmistakable. Experts in Moscow were stunned. This wasn't a local communique. The cipher, the routing codes, it came directly from the central government in Moscow. It was a secret directive, a black telegram sent from the very top of the Bolshevik Party. When decoded, the message was just 4 lines. Line 1, proceed with the implementation. This single line shattered the official narrative. The decision wasn't made by the local Soviet in a panic. It was a direct, premeditated order from the highest levels of power. Line 2. No exceptions. Verify completion. This was cold. This wasn't just about the Tsar. No exceptions meant the Tsarina, the daughters, the young six, Tsarevich, Alexei, and even their servants. Everyone. Line 3. Remove all traces. Deny all. This was the cover-up. The order wasn't just to dispatch them, but to erase them from history, to make the bodies vanish so no one could ever find them, turning them into martyrs. Line 4. The heirs must not awaken. This line, this is the one that historians are obsessed with. The heirs must not awaken. It's a chillingly poetic, almost what the f*** phrase. It wasn't just about ending their lives, it was about ending the idea of them. Ending the bloodline. Ensuring no one could ever rally around a surviving Romanov. You see, Yakov Yurovsky wasn't just a revolutionary. He was the son of a poor watchmaker, a man who grew up with nothing, hating the imperial system that Nicholas represented. He was seen as the perfect man for the job, cold, precise, and most importantly, obedient. But this diary proves he was something else too, a man who was deeply, profoundly haunted. He kept this telegram. He didn't destroy it as his orders commanded. He pressed it into his diary, a secret piece of evidence, a silent witness to the real order he was given. The thing nobody tells you is that Yurovsky did write official reports about that night. He wrote a famous note in 1920 and gave speeches to old Bolsheviks, but those were the public version. This diary, this is the private one. It's his confession, and it reveals that the simple dispatch ordered by the telegram was anything but. The telegram's chilling order was just the plan. The diary's next page details the horrific 20-minute chaos of the night itself. The jewels that refused to break. The official reports Yurovsky filed later were clean and professional. They described a necessary act carried out efficiently. His lost diary, however, paints a picture of pure, unadulterated chaos. To put it mildly, the event was a horrific failure of planning, and the diary records every terrible second. In an entry written just 2 days later, his handwriting shaky, Yurovsky details the plan. Around 2 in the morning on July 17th, he woke the family up. He used a lie, telling them there was fighting in the streets and they needed to move to the basement for their own safety. The family, tired and confused, gathered their things. The Tsar carried his sick son, Alexei, in his arms. The daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, came down carrying pillows and their little dog. They were led into a small, empty basement room. It was tiny, maybe 15 feet by 18 feet. The family was confused. They asked for chairs. Yurovsky, playing the part, had 3 chairs brought in. The Tsarina, Alexandra, and the frail Alexei sat. The Tsar stood next to his son. The daughters and their servants stood behind them. 11 people packed into a small, damp room. Then Yurovsky walked in with his squad. A full dozen men armed with pistols crowded into the doorway. The air was thick. Yurovsky's diary recalls the moment. He pulled out a piece of paper and read the order. In view of the fact that your relatives continue their offensive against Soviet Russia, the Ural Executive Committee has decided to dispatch you. The Tsar, according to the diary, turned in disbelief. He just said 2 words. What? What? Yurovsky didn't wait. He raised his pistol and fired at Nicholas. That was the signal. What happened next was not an execution, it was a frenzy. The diary describes an absolute pandemonium. The room with its brick walls became an echo chamber. The men, all 12 of them, emptied their pistols at the 11 targets. The noise was deafening. The room filled instantly with thick, acrid smoke from the gunpowder, so thick that no one could see anything. The men were firing blind. When the smoke finally started to clear, the real horror began. The Tsar was down. The Tsarina was down. But the children were not. Here's the wow factor that historians have confirmed, but Yurovsky's diary describes with personal terror. The daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, were still standing. Some were screaming, some were huddled against the wall, but they were alive. The projectiles, he wrote, were bouncing off their clothes like peas off a stone wall. The men in the firing squad, many of whom were drunk, began to panic. They thought the girls were witches or protected by God. The truth was even more incredible. The Tsarina, paranoid and ever fearful, had forced her daughters to sew their royal jewels, diamonds, rubies, and pearls into the linings of their corsets. They were wearing over 18 pounds of diamonds. It was a desperate, secret attempt to hide their fortune, and it had accidentally created a crude form of body armor. Yurovsky's diary describes how he screamed at his men to stop, to fix their bayonets. The scene descended into something medieval. The smoke was so thick, the room so small, the men were slipping on the floor, stabbing wildly in the dark. 20 minutes of screaming, smoke, and terror. Yurovsky himself, in his cold, precise way, wrote that he had to personally take his pistol and end the matter for Alexei and Tatiana. The telegram's order, the heirs must not awaken, was fulfilled in the most brutal way imaginable. The event was over, but disposing of 11 bodies, as the telegram ordered, became a 2-day nightmare that would haunt Yurovsky forever. Erasing the Romanovs. The secret telegram had given a clear order: remove all traces, deny all. But the chaotic scene in the basement was just the beginning. The next part of Yurovsky's diary reads like a desperate, frantic horror story. Now he had 11 bodies to make disappear. He described how his men, shaken and drunk, wrapped the bodies in bed sheets and loaded them onto a truck. They drove out into the dark, rain-soaked forest, but the truck, a heavy Fiat, got stuck in the mud. The diary details hours of cursed work, with the men trying to pull the truck free, all while the bodies lay in the back. When they finally reached the mine, a new problem arose. The mine wasn't deep enough, the water was shallow. The bodies were floating, visible from the surface. Yurovsky, panicking, realized this would be found in days. This was not removing all traces. His diary entry for the next day, July 18th, is even more frantic. He ordered his men back to the mine. They had to retrieve the packages. He wrote about the terrible sight and the unbearable smell. The men's morale was completely broken. They had to fish the bodies out of the cold, muddy water. A new plan was hatched, a plan of total erasure. Yurovsky's diary confirms the gruesome details that forensics later proved. He ordered the bodies to be dismembered. He had his men purchase large quantities of sulfuric acid and gasoline from a nearby town. They took the remains to a desolate clearing. For 2 days they worked. They tried to burn them, but the materials were too wet. They used the acid to make them unrecognizable. Finally, they smashed what was left and buried the fragments in 2 separate shallow graves right under a cart track. They covered the spot with railroad ties, hoping no one would ever think to look under a road. What many overlooked is how this very chaos, this desperate cover-up, is what fueled the Anastasia myth for decades. Because the disposal was so sloppy and frantic, because Yurovsky's men were drunk and disobeying orders, it seemed plausible that one of them could have escaped. The diary, in its own way, explains why the mystery lasted so long. But the real story, the one Yurovsky confided to his pages, was the psychological collapse of his men. He wrote that one of the shooters, a man named Medvedev, could not stop weeping and drank himself into a stupor. Another guard, who had to help with the disposal, lost his mind and had to be sent away. Years later, one of the original shooters, a man named Pyotr Ermakov, would get drunk and boast about what he did, only to fall into a deep, dark depression. Yurovsky's diary suggests at least one of the men involved met a tragic end by his own hand, a few years later, unable to live with the memories. The diary's final pages reveal why Yurovsky kept the note and the diary, and it's not what you think. The telegram's true purpose. So the biggest question is, why? Why did Yakov Yurovsky, the cold, methodical watchmaker's son, keep this diary? Why would he, of all people, hold on to the one piece of evidence, that secret telegram, that proved the entire Soviet narrative was a lie? The final pages of the diary, written years later in the 1930s, give us the answer. And it's not what you'd expect. He didn't keep it as an insurance policy. He didn't keep it out of pride. He kept it because he was haunted. The diary reveals a man who, on the surface, was a model Soviet citizen. He went on to hold boring, bureaucratic jobs. He was a good communist, but at night he was a prisoner of the Ipatiev house. He wrote about nightmares of the basement and the sound of the dog. He described seeing the small one, Anastasia, in his dreams, her eyes not angry but questioning. This lost diary isn't a revolutionary's journal, it's a confession. It's the only place he could write down the truth. The thing is, many people are looking for a complex mystery, a grand conspiracy. But the truth Yurovsky's diary reveals is much simpler, and to be honest, much more terrifying. Are we missing a key detail? Is this all true? The diary, the telegram, they show us that the real secret isn't just that Lenin or Moscow gave the order. The real secret is how the order was given and what it did to the men who obeyed it. The telegram, "The heirs must not awaken," wasn't just an instruction. It was a new kind of power. It was a cold, bureaucratic message that gave permission for an atrocity. It turned men into tools. It was a piece of paper that erased humanity first, making it possible for Yurovsky and his squad to erase the family next. Yurovsky, the man who believed he was ending tyranny, became the very thing he hated. He followed an order, and in the end, that simple act of obedience cost him his soul. He had to write it down. He had to have one place in the universe where the real story was told. The story of the jewels, the smoke, the 20 minutes of chaos, and the little piece of paper that started it all. Was Yakov Yurovsky a monster or just the first man to show us how terrifying simple obedience can be? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden stories.